Great. Welcome, everybody. Excited to have everybody here. I think I've met all of you. I'm Felicia Rubenstein. I'm the owner of HAYVN. And we have 4 pillars of focus. Actually, we're adding a 5th now, but we focus on empowering women, entrepreneurship, health and wellness, and sustainability and social impact. We're a B Corp that I'm really proud to have just been recertified with the help of Carrie McDevitt, who this is what she does for a living, is just help people through the process. And a B Corp is about doing business as a force for good. And one thing I wanted to mention too, as part of our focus, we also do a pop-up shop that we have coming up next, December 5th. And it's a holiday pop-up and it's sustainable focus. So there's going to be products that you can buy, as well as there's a bunch of the people who are B Corps. We're having our meeting here, that our strategy meeting for the year here in the afternoon, and then everybody's coming and showing their wares. So it's a really fun event. We have 30 vendors. It's upstairs, downstairs, plenty of food, drink, and music, and just I hope everybody can come to that. It's free for members and $15 for anybody else, so very reasonable, and hopefully we'll get some holiday things. And also just in general, we have a calendar. Actually, this is the November events calendar. We're almost done with that.
December's coming.
December is all set. We actually have planned out our whole year next year for events, so so we're excited about that. And we're going to be doing 5 sustainable meetings similar to this for next year. And I do want to also, I'm going to pass this over to our team, but Lisa Miniter and Sam and Sylvina and Soledad have helped with planning, being part of this community and planning the events. And actually also I should mention Kate too. So I'm going to turn it over to Lisa because she has a much better presentation to talk about. I do also want to say thank you to Dominique for being here today. We had Dominique here last year, yeah, and we were so excited to have her at the last minute. You were sick,
I
right?
was, yeah, it was such a bummer.
Yeah, but we pivoted, we had her online and
Yes.
everybody was here to listen. So we're excited to have her here in person today.
Thank you, it's great to be here in person with everybody.
Good, so I'm
Thanks.
gonna turn this over.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. Welcome again. This is our 2nd annual government outlook on sustainability. And so through Dominique, we're going to hear what is basically transpired when it comes to sustainability in the state, and in particular also with Fairfield County in terms of policies and progress. And so in addition to that, when it comes to the presentation, it will certainly be a comprehensive one. So again, it not only will include the state, but it will include perspectives on land, on water, on energy, to name a few of what we'll discuss. And I mean with topics that are relevant to people in the room. This won't be technical, it will be relevant topics. And so we're excited to have this, in my opinion, a rare opportunity to have both state and county perspectives on certain topics. And I think before we go into the presentation, it also would be helpful, just for those of you who don't know this, but our sustainability programming actually will be 2 years in January. And so just very briefly, we started out, and Dominique was a participant in this, with roundtable sessions every month. And that was one Friday a month. We then elevated to early evening format in January, and we're going to continue in that format every other month. I do also think it's probably relevant, just if you're not aware, to share a bit of a flavor of what we've done in terms of themes, because if it does resonate with you, I would encourage you to go on the HAYVN website. All of this, including tonight, will be recorded and then it also launches on YouTube. So as an idea, just again, to give you a flavor of what we've done to kind of reflect, in my opinion, the diversity of sustainability, the many subsectors, the innovation that's never ending. We've been as diverse as an example, fashioning the future of conscious consumption with a lens on fashion. That was on the immense global clothing waste crisis, and that's never ending. So that was one example. Another one is, milking sustainability with taste. That had to do with regenerative agriculture and the dairy sector. We had a business person in that area as well as an artisanal cheese specialist. So again, I'm just reflecting on some of the diversity. Another one is eliminating chemicals and empowering water stewardship. We had the Connecticut State Director from cleanwaters.org, as well as someone else present. So we've had basically to support this ever evolving role of what sustainability or sector is about. We really do try to speak to our audience and what is relevant to not just have an interesting conversation, but hopefully to have key takeaways that are good for you, whether it's for your, say, personal pursuits or of course, business. With that being said, with our presenter tonight, we are happy to say she is a re-elected Connecticut State Representative, 144th District, in Norwalk, and part of Westport, Dominique Johnson. She is beyond just the representative. I mean, she is, and of course, a Connecticut, she is with our Connecticut General Assembly, but she's also our voice in Hartford when it comes to representing our district. Beyond that, she's also the Deputy Majority Caucus Chair, and she's Assistant Majority Leader. To extend beyond that, is that with how multidimensional she is also a member of the Committee for Advanced Education. She is also on the Judiciary Committee, and she was the co-author of the Green Jobs Bill in January, which also extends to other adjacent spaces within that area. Prior to that, she's also been involved as a consultant. She has her own consulting firm, and that is organizational. It's involving with organizational and strategic social impact consulting. So this was her other life before she became so immersed with politics.
True.
From an educational standpoint, I'm gonna kind of talk about the other way, meaning she has a PhD from Temple University. She has that in urban education and educational policy. She then, before that, was at Stanford University with an MA in communications. But I find also what's very notable, her undergrad and BA was in peace, conflict, and social justice studies. Truly a humanitarian, truly cares about planetary health, our finite resources, and also, of course, in my opinion, also thriving communities with social equity. She epitomizes that. And so we're delighted to have her here tonight. And welcome again, Dominique.
Thank you, Lisa. Wow, I really appreciate that. And seeing kind of how all the pieces fit together eventually, you know, this is, I joke, but it's true, the most full-time, part-time job I've ever had. Being in the legislature, we are technically part-time. So getting back into the classroom would be a goal, but right now, this work is just an honor to do, and it's a privilege. And so I'm really grateful to be able to share some of the things we've been doing over the past 2 years, but also just looking ahead, right? Which I know is the theme for tonight. About what could come, knowing that, you know, if we had this conversation maybe in mid-October when we were first planning this conversation, depending on the outcome at the federal level, we're looking at perhaps different things that will emerge as priorities for us. The theme you'll see tonight in some of the slides is reactivity versus proactivity, and where we can find both is what I'm thinking we're going to be facing. So again, I'm really happy to be here with you, and I'd love this to be more of a back and forth too. So I won't just talk at you for a long time. I think that it's important to kind of see where you all are, and the things that you all are interested in doing are very important to us up in Hartford, so that we can have the opportunity we have to create laws that help make it easier for you to incentivize B Corps, to make it easier for family farms and innovative small businesses to do the work they need to do. And a lot of the work I've done in this area has been a really important part of that. I brought this just to get a sense of kind of the breadth of what we do, but also this little box right here, it's my visual aid. This is from this past year, right? And I'm starting off by saying that there's two pieces of legislation I thought were really important for climate related things, and you'll see what they are right there. But I was hoping that we could put in that box another bill, and it didn't make it. It was a bill called 5004. I talked about it in some form like a year, when we were here a year ago. It was not even quite on the horizon, but we knew that our House caucus up in Hartford was going to have a priority for the climate, and it ended up being priority number 4. We worked really hard on it. I was part of the core team. Not surprisingly, a lot of the people that worked on it represent shoreline communities, and so my partner in the Westport delegation, Jonathan Steinberg, who's energy chair, did a lot of work there. My part of it was talking about business incentives, how we help small businesses, how we helps like climate tech startups who want to get started in this state, how we help young people who want to do this work stay here to do the work, how we leverage climate tech in it's called HAYVN, but it's the big climate tech incubator in the state that the state has given money through Connecticut Innovations. How do we leverage that, right? How do we make sure that fundamentally we have small business provisions and entrepreneurship provisions in it that are pro-business and pro-growth, right? And miraculously, almost, we got the Connecticut Business and Industry Association at the table to agree with what was in the bill along and to testify on it, as well as a lot of the union workers that are making this big scale climate infrastructure work happen, all on the same page. But as I've found, things can really fall apart at the very end. It's government, and you could put all your heart and soul into it, but it didn't get called in the Senate. But I know, and that is what I'm going to be speaking about tonight, I can tell you that is one of our big priorities, is bringing the provisions of that bill back to make sure that we can make as much of it happen as possible for, I think, did I get this right? No, that's the, I'm trying to use this, the big button.
I have to click the screen.
Oh, I'd have to click it at the screen.
Okay.
Or I'll just do this. No? Oh, it could be because we're on a Zoom, maybe. I'll let, you're the pro. I'm not gonna try to troubleshoot that. So I'll keep, but I mean, what we're seeing now is agenda items we have had for the past 2 years, we have not lost sight of that we want to work on. But we're also facing down a reality where a lot of the work that's done, thank you so much, appreciate that. Oh, and I'm already. Backing up. I've already started the second slide. So a lot of the state initiatives and legislation I'm gonna talk about tonight are things that are informed by the work we've done over 2 years, that we don't wanna give up hope on, that we know that people, our constituents, our communities want us to work on, business owners, people who work in this space of trying to innovate and create these small businesses that leverage, right, sustainability as a foundational part of the business model. Like, we don't want to give up on that, and I don't want to give up on that. So I'm ready to go back and reintroduce these bills. And luckily, we have an environment chair that I think also is in sync with that idea. But we also have the reality now of perhaps what has to be a reactive, right? A reactive force to what we're going to see perhaps coming down from the federal government. And the reason I wanted to show you these 2 initiatives under the climate box are fabulous. But unfortunately, these are not large scale interventions at all, right? These are highly compromised, which is a part of the process, right? You've got to get everybody at the table, but also highly specific interventions for our environment that don't really try to get toward root causes. And I think that we've been hearing from constituents for years about things we'll talk about tonight, right? Like flooding mitigation in our communities. We need a big, broad climate protection act. So this bill I was talking about, 5004, was named the Connecticut Climate Protection Act. And we're in this state going to bring it back. But the realities of our expectations for the session will temper that in terms of how and what we are able to do. And no one right now in government, if they tell you they know exactly what's gonna happen, I don't think anybody would, because we just don't know. So this is the roadmap for our conversation. As I said, I would love to have it be more of a conversation as opposed to me like lecturing, but just to give you an idea of some of the things our state has done, right? Leading up to where we are now, and I talked about this a little last year. We've got something called GreenerGov Connecticut, which is fundamentally the executive branch, the governor, deciding, you know what, we need to make sure we as a government are sustainable and we're not just telling, rather in my own mind, like, it's more powerful when we internalize these things as a state and not just kind of give directives to people, right? So that is the governor saying, we want all of our agencies to do some in-house assessment about carbon footprints, about procurement, about things that we can do to be more sustainable in our own practices. We have a green bank, which is established, and if I'm not mistaken, it was among the first in the nation. It is, I think, perhaps going to be seen as a real solution to the energy affordability crisis we're facing. it's a way that we can fund, really, like, it's been a lot about commercial solar, right? People who own a business who wanna put solar on the roof, and it allows them to finance that, and it's an amazing thing. But I think that also talk about how we can help with school districts leverage the green bank to fund solar canopies at the parking lots at the schools, right? How we can use the green bank to potentially remove some of the things that have been put into the public benefits charge in your Eversource bills and make it into like something we as a state own as opposed to pass on to the power company. You know, that's been something we've been talking about. Is this a vehicle for that? So we have some infrastructure set up already at the state level to do some more innovative things. The question is, will there be like political will, but also will there be a lot of noise that we have to separate out signal from noise to get this done?
I'm sorry, is the
Oh, yeah.
funding for the green bank protected going forward?
Well, that's a good question. I think funding's gonna come up a lot tonight. Because a lot of the things we wanna do are dependent on federal funding. And I don't know what's gonna happen, yeah, but that's a good question. It's set up, but it needs to be continually funded.
Yeah.
So is this, I mean, this is a hypothetical, but is this gonna fall at the wayside as a priority because all of a sudden we have absolute crises of funding other things in the states? I don't know. Yeah, so that's a really good question. We've got 3 major executive orders from Governor Lamont when he came in that were all climate related. A lot of what I wanted to do in my part of the Climate Protection Act was to codify the Connecticut Clean Economy Council, which was literally the engine to jumpstart the clean economy, right? The way that we can make a pro-growth, pro-business sustainability movement in the state. It's a wide-ranging set of executive orders, but he, right now has it to him. We get a new governor, they may not be applicable anymore, right? So codifying some of it in state statute would be maybe a good idea. And then this is my theme tonight, reactive and proactive, because I think that's how we're gonna be successful. But I've been told that, like, for example, the Environment Committee may just be inundated, depending what happens at the federal level, with how do we respond to this new thing that's come down that removes funding from here, or tries, you know, the movement to abolish the EPA, if that is something that they want to do, right? Like, what does that mean for our Environment Committee in Hartford if we are on defense this whole session? And what does that do to our ability to be proactive for things that we want to continue doing? So, as a case in point, I'm trying to manage my own expectations, right? I know that's like the buzzword for me, is like managing expectations, but we don't know what we don't know yet. And I think a lot of this on purpose is going to be inevitably reactive, right? Because we're not getting memos from Washington about, okay, so prepare to do this and this because, for example, this department is gonna get unfunded. But I can tell you what we were working on, and you'll see some question marks because those are really being, I think, going to be challenges for us. We have a food waste and recovery active community, like Food Rescue does great work. You know, some of your, like, there are amazing startups starting in this field with like amazing apps being created to connect, like, say, Trader Joe's with person to person so they can get the food, right? And then volunteers, you know, and I did one of these. It's an amazing thing to do. You go, you take your car, you bring the food, and it's seamless and it's incredible. And that's a really amazing, I think, piece of this startup world that is more and more getting recognized as being a solution to the food waste crisis, but also the fundamentally, like, the food scarcity crisis that's starting to emerge, right? So we did a bill, and I see Diane here who helped with this bill, I think, for food waste. And I think I made a point to make sure that the food recovery folks were involved in that in some way. We also have, like, them working in the schools, right? So that we don't have all of the food in the schools going straight into the trash bin. Solid waste, compost and recycling. This is another thing that we really need to work out that is becoming, and I think we were talking about this, like, it's becoming in some ways like a hidden tax into people's municipal, you know, the tax bills, the way that we might need to raise taxes because the rates for recycling, right, have gone down and therefore it's more expensive and people don't want to take the recycling as much. So this is gonna become more of a municipal issue if we don't start trying to figure this out. Will we do curbside compost or not? There are some communities that want us to mandate that statewide. Is that a good idea or not? will the compost be something that the startup? Yeah, will the startup like world come up with some amazing solutions for composting, right? I've already seen some really great businesses like form around this idea. And just general solid waste, right? And how we handle that. We did do some good work with the bottle bill this past session, but unfortunately, this huge bill we had didn't make it any further. The EV infrastructure to me was a huge, when we were meeting a year ago, that was gonna be the big question. Will we go with the mandates that we wanted to from California, or will we default to the EPA mandates? Well, as you can imagine, unfortunately, like nothing happened, and you know that because here we are. But also what happened is that we realized that in so many places in the state, people just were not ready to commit to this. And their voices were heard through their legislators. And we really needed to do a better job about why this would be an important thing. But unfortunately now what I'm hearing is because of the federal level not wanting to really invest in an EV charging infrastructure, we may just be in stasis mode here. And I'm not sure. We have some state programs that incentivize. I'm looking into one of the small businesses in my district, whether there's some state programs to incentivize putting them into parking lots they may own at their businesses for their customers as like a public good, but also, you know, to help. But right now, a lot of this EV infrastructure is tied up with our affordability crisis with our utilities because it's something that we as ratepayers are paying for. And a lot of people right now are being stretched and they don't know if that's a good idea anymore. So that's the question mark. If there aren't federal monies coming down for us to do this work in the state, are we as a state gonna wanna fund it all by ourselves, and can we? Third rather on the list, I've already invoked it, but the affordability. So we know with the hottest July on record, right? The AC was being cranked, the bills were going like unprecedented in some cases. And we're also sitting here in a drought, right? These are having real effects on people's ability, like we're having to conserve water now, we were having to conserve electricity in July. And we've had some of the worst catastrophic flooding in the state in August, not too far from here. Fairfield County was one of the most deeply impacted counties in the entire state. And so all of this is combining, right, to lead us to needing to do massive interventions. And I'm gonna skip ahead here. But a lot of what we wanted to do is potentially based on funding from the Inflation Reduction Act, which is, if you, like, who knows if that is going to continue? A lot of people who know more than I are saying that we can't necessarily depend upon that funding coming down from the federal government anymore. So how are we gonna address some of these things without a major source of funding? The bipartisan infrastructure funding may stick around a little more. You're seeing the roads and bridges in our communities with those Build Back Better signs and you're paid for by the bipartisan. So like, I'm hoping they don't pull all that funding. We need a new walk bridge in Norwalk, for example, right? People need to not get stuck in the train. And a lot of that is relating to this, I probably should have flipped it, but it relating to conduct. Like our Department of Transportation of the state is the major, you know, conduit for that bipartisan infrastructure funding, obviously. And they have a lot of assets across the state. And so right now they're using money from this bipartisan infrastructure funding through the Federal Highway Administration to do a resilience improvement plan, which fundamentally means they need to assess all of their assets across the state to figure out what are their vulnerabilities to climate change, to flooding, to excessive heat, right? I think, so they're trying to do, in many ways, an inventory.
So they really don't know right now where they are on like a scale of 1 to 10, if they're at a 5.
I don't think
No,
so.
no, okay.
As I understand it, and Condot would be able to illuminate this more, but they're assessing their vulnerabilities with the intent to be able to prioritize, right? Like, okay, we have this part of 95 that could be underwater, right? This part of the train line goes right over wetlands, inland marsh, and it's expected to be underwater in 5 to 10 years or what, don't, you know, that's not specific to quote me on, but like, we have infrastructure so near the coastline, infrastructure that is prone to flooding already. There's a part of 95 in my district that every time it rained, it was almost impassable, right? Between exit 16 in Norwalk and 17 in Westport. So a lot of the work that's being done now is to put in massive storm drain infrastructure that's built for like 100+ year storms to help alleviate that. So that's when they say like the vulnerable assets, I think it's even far inland, right? The roads. I was speaking to our deputy commissioner up at Condot about the fact that up in Monroe in northern Fairfield County, right? When those floods came through, they were begging people not to drive on roads that were cordoned off because it looked fine, but what happened is the river, pretty much the brook turned into a river that had nowhere to go, so it went underneath and the whole underbed of the road was a river. Like the asphalt was there, but there was nothing below it. It was completely washed out. So that is the kind of work they're trying to do to figure out, okay, we clearly have these storms that are gonna be more frequent. We have this excessive, extreme weather. They need to be proactive, so they're planning. But I think until we see this report and it's due by the end of 2024, so we'll get it at some point very soon. I can imagine that there will be action steps from it that the transportation committee in particular will wanna work on. But like, this is the mix we're in right now. And there's a lot of question marks, there's a lot of ifs and a lot of things that need massive infrastructure funding. And are we gonna have the funds to do it, is a huge question for me. This is another thing that I think a lot of what we did in the Climate Protection Act was aspirational. It was policy that a lot of the agencies said, well, we could do this right now, right? So we saw it as kind of like, at least I saw it as a punch list. I said like, all right, these are the things that we think based on our constituents and what they want, y'all should be working on. So I'd be happy if the agencies like went ahead and did it, but as everything, as with everything, everyone has a million things going on at once, so they have to prioritize, right? So I think that fundamentally, my goal is to fight for the things that you're seeing up here on the screen, which was my part of the bill, that I think directly relates perhaps to a lot of us here tonight in community, which has to do with how do we make sustainability and the business community like be working together to make sure that we can not just have, I mean, to be honest, not just have this be a very one-sided thing. Like, how do we bring everybody together here, knowing that, in my opinion, I think the business community and startup community has so much to offer this space, so much. That if we do not consider what they need and we don't try to incentivize the work that people are already doing, including yourselves, we're gonna have an absolutely missed opportunity.
May I
Yes.
make one comment to that?
Of course, yeah.
Since you mentioned Connecticut Innovation
That's right.
as a funding resource. I have a startup business called Smart Healthy Green Living. We are a streaming
That's
network.
amazing.
So I contacted Connecticut Innovation saying I'm Connecticut business. And is there any funding available for us? And they said, well, yes and no. And basically it's a no. Because they're saying, well, okay, if you go into the private marketplace and you get some funding from some credible source, then yeah, we'll come rail right in back of it.
Okay.
And in which case I said to them, then I don't need you.
Right.
So I find it really sad that Connecticut puts forward Connecticut Innovation. There's nothing innovative about this approach. It is for a startup, if you're saying we're here to support startups, well, come in and say, we are gonna support you. We've assessed your business. We see it's viable. You have our support and we're gonna fund you with $1 million or whatever it is.
Okay.
I don't need them when I have already gone to an XYZ funding source in the private marketplace.
Right.
That is backwards.
The government should fund the innovation up front as opposed to you having to see capital first, right? Is that the
Exactly.
point?
If,
Okay.
if the
Yeah.
state says, we're here to support businesses in Connecticut, well, then do it.
Right.
I don't need you when I have other capital available.
Right, and I appreciate that feedback, because that to me is what I envisioned here, right? Is that we would actually make a point to incentivize the work you're doing. And we were told, well, you know, Connecticut Innovations exists, you should talk with them about how you can leverage them.
You can't leverage, they
Okay.
will leverage off somebody else.
There has to be That's a great piece of feedback, and it's good to know, and I really appreciate that, because
Yeah, I
that's gonna be very helpful for me.
Great,
Thank you.
I hope somebody will hear that finally. I don't know if it's a matter of they don't have the in-house ability to assess businesses, but how difficult is
wonder.
that really
Okay,
at the end of the day?
okay,
You make a business plan, you can assess it, here's a projection like anybody else does. They should, if they don't have it in-house, they should hire people or bring in advisors or whatever they should do, but be there for your small business ahead of everybody else.
And maybe based on this as like an N of one, maybe Connecticut Innovations is not the proper conduit for this work. It should be housed in some business, small business entity in our Department of Economic Community Development, right?
Maybe
Maybe.
so, but,
Yeah.
they're great at giving grants and other sort of
Okay.
funds out of the economic development from my exploration with them
Okay.
anyway. But Connecticut Innovation is the only one that will give you actual capital.
Right.
But with this big caveat of go into the private market first, raise the money there, and then maybe we come afterwards. And like, goodbye, bye-bye. What does the state do for me here? Nothing.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think they have like, within Connecticut Innovation, like a group within the Connecticut Innovation that has funding, that provides not specifically capital or money, but resources to the startup.
I see.
So if you're looking for, I don't know, you need a specific, I don't know, HR, or you need like something or a software or something, maybe they will fund that specific project within that department that it has, but there's so many companies and I don't know how easy it is to get that funding.
It's
But-
impossible. It's
okay.
the same old story. I've talked to everybody up the chain in Connecticut Innovations. It's always the same thing. You bring private commitment, then we will look at you. And then they say you have to have so many people working in Connecticut, blah, 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 all of that, fine. But why would I strap that on myself when I have capital from private money anyway?
There
That's
are
great.
other like recent, like there were grants, it's not great. And
It's too small. The
Right, too
grants-
small, and then there was like CT Next, cause I know we
Yeah.
originally had
That's right.
some funding for that, but then that got kind of reorged.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, but
It's
I
not really
understand, right, Connecticut Innovations is trying to make money for Connecticut, I guess, like they're invest, so they need a lead investor, and then.
Well, and they've
it's
had a
right,
very sad record, as we all know,
Yeah,
in that department. They developed, they invested heavily in bio and pharma, and they really got themselves grilled. So then they kind of spread out into other areas, so their record has not been great. So that whatever system they're doing, don't put forward your supporting startups in Connecticut with this process.
Got it.
I'd be better off talking to my neighbors in Greenwich than spending time in Connecticut Innovation.
That's really helpful feedback, thank you. Because we were directed towards them in the process of writing this bill when we wanted to put in startup provisions. Because they're kind of seen, to your point, as the go-to place. When you
Right,
want to do something with startups, talk to them.
right.
So it's really good feedback. Because I don't know if there's a way now that we move this forward, knock on wood, with the ability to actually do this, given the funding realities we might be facing. This is something I want to have an answer to before we really move that part forward again. So thank you. And the other piece too, to your point, is like, isn't there a way that we can be a little bit more, agile about what we're funding, right? I think we push to have B Corps involved, right, as a model to incentivize that. We push to have family farms involved, because I think it's really important that they're fundamentally like, so many of them are, obviously they're small businesses, but a lot of the intergenerational work that's going on in farms right now has to inevitably be very startup in nature and thinking because of adaptation to the climate and the food insecurity and,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, we're only reliant on, when it comes to food, only 3% of our food is actually consumed in the state. We're very
From
low.
the state, right?
Yeah, the highest in the region is Vermont. I think it's like 25%, no surprise. But to your point, yeah, we need to get more reliant on our own food as well with consumption, certain types at least. Vegetables, things like that.
And they need startup funding too. I
Yeah,
mean, it's like,
they
yeah,
absolutely-
they
Agtech,
absolutely
Agtech,
need
yeah.
that. Yeah. And some of this too, I think, is how do we move forward without leaving people behind? Because I do not want to do that personally. I don't wanna work on a bill where we're just gonna leave large groups of employment sectors behind. And so the legacy career transition was very important to me. Unfortunately, the bill didn't pass, so the money that got put in the budget couldn't be implemented as far as I understand it, unless something has happened that I'm unaware of, which would be great. But what that was like all these industries that we need to transition, right? We need to have the ability for people to be retrained into the new, for example, the clean energy, right? So you can't just lose your job and have no pathway forward into the parallel, energy career. And lastly, the codification of Clean Economy Council is sounds, wonky and boring, and it kind of doesn't really, it's like, okay, fine, you're taking something the governor said, but you're putting it into state statute, but I think fundamentally, what we were hearing is that gave them a gravitas, it gave them a way to be in our state law, no matter who's in the governor's mansion, but it also gave them the ability to leverage the fact that they're the person, that entity rather, is supposed to be bringing all these people together, right? The economy council is supposed to be made up of everybody doing this work in the state, all sitting at the same table. So I would hope that that would make the experience that you unfortunately had, this could be a way to improve upon that, right? To say, well, if this isn't the way, then this other person at the table should be the way. But the only way that can happen is if this group actually gets the funding it needs to properly do its job, and codification was a step in that direction, right? So these are the things that I want to bring back. Again, like, to me, it makes sense that we do not move forward for sustainability without thinking about how the business community can be and should be an integral part of this. Especially people like you with startups, with small businesses, with the people who are willing to take more of the risk on now for this benefit that we're all gonna have down the road, right? Like the early adopters, right, should be given these incentives. That's why I think it's so important.
Yeah, well, you're saying, is there anything as an update with the innovation district saying that, meaning, there was the Stanford Innovation.
That's right.
New Haven, Groton, East Hartford, and
Yeah.
to her point, it would have been Stanford Innovation, but I think
Yeah.
that kind of goes south, but
They had something
they
there at
did,
Stanford
they had 3 years
recently.
ago, I remember it. and
Yeah,
So I think it kind of devolved, or, yeah.
Yeah, their main offers, there are people that have experience that you can talk to and whatnot, that's all fine.
Mm.
But mainly it was office space. There was a building there and you have an office space. Who needs office space these days?
Yeah.
I need a computer and I can be in a bathroom.
yeah, like you're good. So, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
it's.
It devolves in,
Don't
okay.
spend money on more office space. Nobody wants to work there. My business partner is in Minneapolis, so
Right.
it's a different world.
Okay,
Yeah, and you're right, Lisa, there was another part of it, which was New Haven.
the district center.
Yeah, and
That
I think
was-
they still have Climate Haven, which is supposed to
Yeah.
be the state hub for this specific work. But it's in New Haven, and as I understand it, a lot of it is offering space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
was their main offer,
Yeah.
and that was fine at the time, but it's totally outdated.
Yeah. So again, there's some thinking there and some infrastructure, but how do we actually operationalize it to meet the needs you actually have, right? So that's why, looking forward, these conversations are so helpful to me. I can't thank you enough, because I never wanna be just doing things that we think are gonna help, but actually don't, right? So, yeah.
Can I make one other point?
Of course.
We're focused on home and garden space.
Okay.
So I come out of the building industry, I've built greenhouses, smart houses, all that sort of
Cool.
stuff. And I think where the state has been good
Okay.
is in incentivizing geothermal installation, solar installation. Connecticut has one of the best, tax support for, charging, what do you call, battery systems.
Right. Yeah.
They've done that really well, so those incentive, that rail of incentivizing installation of these kinds of systems, I believe, is the way to go.
Okay.
Because consumers wanna know, how can I get out of, I paid $1,200 in July for Eversource and my utility bill. There's a willingness to go green, there's a willingness to go sustainable. And keep incentivizing these systems,
Okay.
and I think we'll go a long way.
That's fabulous, and that makes me feel even better about parts of this bill that I did not work on, but it's a huge bill, it was like, I think 50-some pages. We were hoping to expand the heat pump incentivization program
Yes,
and fund it with the IRA funding
yes,
to really put it to scale. So this is great feedback.
yeah, it is,
I think we need to do that.
It's
That's what it sounds
working,
like.
it is
Okay.
absolutely working.
Okay, good.
And Connecticut is really doing a good job there, and I hope very much that as a state, we can figure out how that continue, regardless of whether there's federal support or not.
I hope so too. I really do. That's why I'm a little nervous about the IRA being like the blueprint for how we fund a lot of this, but to your point, we were so close last time, so, sorry, yeah.
And I think last year we were invited to Hartford. I think they were discussing the bill and.
That's right, you all came to advocate for
Yeah,
this.
and that was so great. I think it's like a first approach to listen to the businesses, what are the concerns and that back and forth, was fantastic. So if we continue doing that,
Yes,
that will be fantastic, will be great.
thank you for being there. I was out of town that day, but Christine Palm, who was the main architect of this bill, was there, and I think she organized that, and she said it was phenomenal. And she was so grateful you all came, so thank you. I think we should do that again, frankly,
Yeah.
when this sees the committee again. Yep, so Diane, sorry, yeah.
Well, one thing, cause I was online on the Zoom public hearings for some of these bills, read a lot of that bill.
Yeah.
One thing that was missing, and it just seemed like the Democratic majority balked when the minority jumped on the case of, don't tell us we can't use gasoline powered vehicles and equipment, fossil fuel. And so what I'm hoping that would move it forward faster is to show how to connect the dots with the finances or the cost of health as well as saving money, but not demonizing fossil fuel, but showing that it'll be a slow transition.
I see.
And because some people won't hear that unless it's said over and over again, the communication for what the intent was of the majority, which I was of course in favor of, I didn't hear the messaging. So that as soon as the head of the majority of the Republicans just would say, hey, what are you telling us? People can't afford EVs. They were right. And there wasn't the messaging to talk about the transition and that it's going to be, even in the bill, it was a slow transition, but people weren't reading the bill. They were just listening to the misinformation. So I guess I would love to see better messaging, even nationally. I think that was one of the problems. Messaging about the good stuff.
I hear that, and this bill had nothing in it about electric vehicles, I think on purpose, because we were told the brief was to do all carrot, no stick and incentivize, right? So to your point, though, I think what I'm remembering from this bill were provisions to transition us off natural gas. And that was something I think people did balk at, and the messaging, to your point, in my mind, always should be honed to the audience, and clearly there was a disconnect, I think, in some ways.
I drive an EV
Okay,
and I can tell you, I even felt it is very, you can't mandate everybody shifts into EV when there's zero infrastructure around us here.
yeah, I agree.
And the one charging station we have in Stamford, half of them don't work and the flow rate is so bad because our entire electricity net is so overused that you don't have enough charging power. There are so many issues. You can't dictate something and then not provide the infrastructure that goes with it. I say that as an EV driver.
That is the argument, I think, that fundamentally paused that EV work we were doing pre-session when we met this time last year, yeah. And to your point, I see that as why we need transitions, to Diane's point, like in anything we do, it has to be gradual, in my opinion. Or else we're setting ourselves up.
Well, I think
Yeah.
one thing the state could do, for example, in the charging station, we have all these service rest stations up and down our highways. Why can't Connecticut says, okay, we want to put 10 EV charging stations in all of them?
They have that.
Well,
They have them.
it's Tesla, basically. The other ones,
Well, they're switching everyone's going to be switching, I've read, into a universal connector.
yeah, and they've said that this is gonna happen this year, and it's not gonna happen next year most likely, and it may not even happen in 26. And then you can't just
But they
make it
have,
universal because you need more of these charging stations. I mean, it's such a wait line to get.
For the
Okay,
case
so
that you have a
let's
lot
kind of-
of like chargers everywhere.
Yeah.
I also
Where-
run an EV and I find like I have chargers everywhere for Tesla, right? Not for other brands.
Tesla demonstrated, and this is the genius of Elon Musk. He started with the network of charging stations, and he was the first one in these rush stations to go in there and say, we're gonna offer 12 of them or 10 of them at the time. He was very, very smart to think this through, and then he built out the cars. So Tesla, you're fine.
Yeah,
But I
Tesla's
drive
have
an Audi
everywhere.
for
So,
example, it's
so,
a
I'm
disaster.
sorry to interrupt, but let's
So-
kind of move
Yeah, I'm
on,
sorry.
but
Yeah,
it,
yeah, yeah.
no reason, excellent point, but we.
What you're illustrating is, I think, the reason why unfortunately the EV discussion failed at the legislature a year ago, literally in real time, because these were issues that were brought up. Environmental justice communities or urban core were saying like, well, we need the infrastructure, we're disproportionately affected with asthma rates being higher, you know, with
Mhm.
unclean like air coming from 95 and all of the, right? And so like, we needed to really demonstrate that we made this not just about the communities that could, but every community should have access to this technology, yeah.
Incentivize it via taxes.
Yeah.
So that every building that goes up has 5 EV stations built in. You can do it with tax incentives every time.
And I think, yeah, that zoning at the local level,
Not
that's,
zoning,
it's not zoning?
not zoning,
Oh, okay.
because zoning allows it in most places. It's a
Oh, okay.
cost.
Okay,
It's a
so
cost.
I'm hearing incentives,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Incentives, so, and then you'll get this build out.
And we need, like, the incentive is the carrot, but the carrot represents the fact that we need money, right?
Yeah.
So that is in context, I moved on to the next slide only because I think that this further illustrates the issue of like, how many different things are competing for this funding right now, right? This future proofing for our society to move us forward into a clean energy future requires great sums of money. It requires aspirational legislation that puts us on targets that we should meet, that we should work toward meeting. And a lot of times this is a 2-year cycle, right? So these big picture things, in my opinion, sometimes aren't really as exciting as like the thing we can do like right now or that we have to do right now. And some of the have to do's right now, as we know from August, are starting to become very important. And that's like, that to me is where we're at right now. It's like, how do we react to what a federal government could do that, you know, could be a worst case scenario for people who care about climate change, right, and its effects.
It seems like a lot of it is obviously happening in what is the highest per capita income in the state. It's happening in Fairfield County in particular, not in the Northeast, obviously elsewhere, the quiet corner, hair.
Well, and
More
here,
so.
we have the highest number of EVs, I think,
We do, we index double.
in this, yeah, and Westport, I think, is the highest
countywide, I
in the
know.
whole state, I think, in terms of towns. But we also have some of the highest pollution rates because of the, like, the pollution coming from Ohio, right? That comes in because of the weather patterns here. We're closest to New York, we've got 95, we got the Merritt, we all know how much traffic we have.
Yeah, and COVID with the drive up of real estate, right?
Exactly,
Residents.
even more people are moving here, and that in and of itself is a challenge for an infrastructure, right? And we've got other issues that just existed far beyond because we're an old part of the country, and I've encountered this even back to my time on the council. You have stormwater infrastructure that predates even sometimes 1800s, right? Like, we have underneath us dated infrastructure that is not built for these storms, is not built for this number of people. And we've built out communities and even neighborhoods in Norwalk where it's very dense, you know, you can see the houses were built post-war, but they didn't build out, you know, the stormwater infrastructure underneath it. So there's a community in my district that got 5.1 million funding. Luckily, Senator Duff was instrumental in bringing that back for some bonding so that we could decouple the sewer and the storm drain. So you can imagine how challenging that is for homeowners when that happens.
Yeah.
Those combined sewer overflows are all underneath this. Groundwater contamination, right, when things back up. We use a lot of neonics and pesticides, right, in our lawns and things, and so that all goes into the sound and that affects, we have aquaculture here in Fairfield County off the coast that is some of the best I think, in the entire region, but you know, they're constantly having to test for PFAS, they're constantly having to test for all these things that make it into the water supply. There's questions about, do we ban this at the state level or not, right? And then we've got just sea level rise, like I was saying, I don't remember who I was speaking with beforehand, but there's a Berrying Hill Beach in Westport, just with the tides now, is having their parking lot flooded for at least a day after, right? And this is the type of water that's coming in and remaining in ways that it never used to and not receding as quickly. We've got king tides, all of a sudden parking lots are under water at our beaches. And then with these rain bombs, everything comes down to us, which is why like the Saugatuck, the Aspetuck rivers were flooding, people's cars in August were being floated. I mean, unprecedented kind of stuff because we have it coming from up north in Fairfield and on the coastline, right? And that's where we live. So I'm not surprised that those of us who represent these communities are thinking, hearing from our constituents like that we have to be proactive here. And fundamentally, this is happening now, right? The urban heat islands in Norwalk and all the cities, that's happening now.
Yeah.
And so we have to do something about it, obviously, because it's endangering us right now. The other things in the Climate Protection Act, I want us to work on as well, but this is where we have to start getting strategic about what we are doing that's proactive while knowing we're gonna have to be reactive. And I know there might have been a question before I started mentioning it, but I just wanted to thank you all, and then whoever had the question, we can absolutely talk about it now, and then Lisa, I wanna make sure the things we can talk about too, and I just wanna thank everybody, just to give you a sense of the outlook. There's so much uncertainty, but there's a lot of drive and a lot of passion of people who are taking the things we're hearing from our constituents up to work on. And a lot of this is going to require us to be in contact with you all so that when things happen federally, like we still need to know that, all right, we have to put out that fire, but what do you also want us to do to make life better, to keep us moving forward? Because I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time, is my hope. So thank you all so much, I appreciate it.
What is it gonna ask? I mean, it seems so. Kind of, you know, like, how can we actively help you get some of these things done? Because it, like, we're worried about what's coming, you know, down from the federal government, but what can we do?
That's a great question. I think what you did last year coming up to the Capitol was invaluable. From my colleagues' perspectives, having all these business owners and startup owners in the building to hear their experiences, that you have no idea, like that is just so powerful. Because your stories are the ones that really make a difference. Like I can talk about a business or a startup in my community, but like, oh, that's great. And it has some effect, but actually hearing it from you is invaluable.
So we'll just book, we're doing our strategy session.
Let's do it.
On December 5th, or coming, when we can come next.
And that goes for anything that would help your members, not just on sustainability, but I think in terms of this, for sure, it was immensely helpful from what I heard from colleagues. Another thing is, there's specific bills or provisions you like, we can help you testify, like your state rep, if it's not me, your state senator can help you write testimony to submit it when we go through public hearing. If you feel passionate enough to come up and you wanna testify, we can make sure that you get where you need to go and we can be there to make sure you get that process completed. So that's another thing, like if there are bills that come out that you think would be of particular import to your business, your startup, your visions and your plans, like the part of our job is to make sure you get heard up there. Yeah, so those are two things like right away. And then just like, we do actually look at our email. Like, I think state reps and senators are like the last, like we show up at your door sometimes, even though you don't want us to, and I totally get that. But like, we also are like, we should be responsive to you in the way that only that level can. When you start going up more federally, you know, the constituency gets so much bigger. I think that's email us, like call us, email us, tell us what's going on, because then you cannot, like, you can't underestimate the power that has. Because then we can walk into a room and say, well, I just heard from a business owner that this is the case. How is this gonna help them? Like, we literally gives us points that we can launch from in those committee meetings, and that's really valuable. Yes.
So I don't know if you can answer this,
Sure.
but I mean, those were all great bullet points and a lot of question marks and everything. I appreciate all those. But does Connecticut as a state have a solid list of goals that they're committed to achieve by a certain date? And what are those goals? Like, I don't know, renovate 5 bridges, you know, like mitigate 3 beaches or something like, you know what I mean? Or like get couple more EV charging stations on 5 more exit gas stations or something like that. What are those things and what are the deadlines? Cause we kind of need to pick up the pace. So
I would like be great to be a transparent dashboard, right? That would be really cool. I don't know if that exists, and the resiliency improvement plan for Condot, I think, is meant to create the punch list and priority. But right now, like, they have projects that have end dates, right? Like, this bridge will be completed by 2026. You know, but I don't know if there's a comprehensive list of all the projects going on, to your point. One thing we want to do with the Climate Protection Act was readjust the carbon net zero goals, so we can actually reach them.
That was gonna be my follow-up question. Do we actually have a plan for lowering carbon emissions as a state?
Well, I think this act was supposed to really help us along to recalibrate and then create the plan to get there. The Green Jobs Corps was meant to be like, we need the workforce to achieve the goal, and we don't really have the workforce quite yet. So that was my goal in doing the Green Jobs Corps bill, but that's still working. Government can be frustratingly bureaucratic and slow in ways that really, with something like this, that's a sense of urgency is sometimes really frustrating. There are other words, but frustrating, yeah. So to your point, I would love to see that. I don't know if we can build it into a bill to mandate them to do that on a timeline. I think we should, and we could. So that's a great piece of
Because
feedback.
a lot of the industries have their own kind of like little industry goal.
Right.
Of where they want to go.
Right.
And what particular goal, like, I'm in the building industry too, so I know there's architecture 2030 and a list of
Right.
goals that they want to achieve by 25, they probably won't, but.
But it's important to set goals. Yeah.
At least they have something
Yeah.
that they want to follow to which direction to go to.
And what's sad as an example is we set goals about electrification of the vehicle fleet like 20 years ago.
Right.
And here we are. So to your point, it's like government seems to be pretty good at setting a goal. And then we're like, oh, the goal, we were supposed to meet it. Here's five years. What do we do? You know, not to be like cynical, but yeah, a little bit. Cause to your point, like, we need a plan to get there.
Yeah.
So I would look to your industries like to help us set those goals, cause you're the actual people doing the
And
work.
speaking of goals, I'm just saying the recycling goal, right? I don't think we're near meeting 61% for next year. I think we're at 25-30.
Okay, that makes sense. And recycling levels have gone down too, right?
I think so. It'd be
Yeah.
interesting to know who's recycling most regionally or countywide, but that's a whole other,
That would be,
yeah.
yeah.
Did anyone?
Can I ask you, how did we, from the sort of committee perspective, how did we wind up with wind energy in Connecticut? Where was that decision made?
That's a good question, because right now I think, based on what I'm reading, Governor Lamont is not wanting to necessarily join the compact right now with the other states, like Massachusetts, that are moving forward at a more quick pace. We built a state pier out in New London expressly for the purpose of being able to have the turbines like built there in Connecticut and then shipped off the coast from there. But I don't know whose decision it was to pivot to wind, but I know that it's facing some hiccups now.
Well, I'm asking because I was born and raised in Germany.
Okay.
Germany is like the cradle of wind energy,
Okay.
right? In the North Sea and the Baltic Sea,
Okay.
lots of things. And it has been such a monumental failure.
Okay.
Not in the production of energy from wind turbines,
Okay.
although there are some issues there too, but in the delivery of that energy back to the consumer.
Interesting.
It is not
Okay.
happening.
Okay.
And so at this day and age, to not look at the experiment in Europe that has been there for the last 20 years, and you can see what failures,
Wow.
wind turbines, about 50%, if not more, are idle. Because there's too much energy being produced that cannot find its way through the
Wow.
distribution system. So why, with that example over there in the Netherlands, up and down the North Sea corridor, why we would even have this conversation is beyond me.
That's interesting. That's something to know, because I had not heard that from the perspective of a European. That's very fascinating. And maybe that's why, I don't know, but maybe that's why there's a pause button being pushed. It's possible.
I
Because
don't
there's
know,
definitely a
but
pause button being pushed.
Google it, it is so easy
Okay,
to find,
okay.
I'm happy to attend you.
Yeah. A
Well,
lot
as
of
a segue to that, it's interesting where when Merkel was in, they decommissioned, the nuclear plants, and here we are going through a renaissance.
Well,
With,
because they don't wanna rely on
Well-
Russia anymore, that's why.
well, not with the nuclear would have been right in on the property, I thought, in Germany.
Yeah, they
They decommissioned
decommissioned
it.
all of those and now they wanna go back to nuclear because the fear is Russia is controlling the gas.
Yeah.
Basically, and now apparently the new thing that Trump is saying, Germany is buying liquid gas from the US.
Mhm.
And so that they get off their dependence on Russia.
Interesting,
And
okay.
Which is dirty too. but
the
anyway.
problem with Merkel is she was fluent in Russia, she adored Putin, so there were so many treaties done with Russia, it was crazy, but
Interesting.
Europe is really dependent on,
Okay.
needs to create other resources, and that's what one of the argument was, well, we have all this wind. So let's do it, but the problem is, nobody wants to have these huge transmission lines going right through their cities and villages. So that, then they said, well, we have to bring this all underground, and that became so astronomically expensive that now there's no distribution system.
Interesting.
They can't give this energy that they're producing away. In the meantime, they're killing flocks of birds and everything else
Wow.
as a result of them. And they're also, in terms of anybody you're thinking about health problems, there are very specific health problems that come from these turbines because the constant pressure that they emit. There are experiments that they're saying, cows can't deliver milk anymore, chickens don't lay eggs anymore, people are having all kinds of issues, psychological and other health issues as a result of wind turbines. So they're not exactly as green as they sound. But please, anybody in committees needs to look at the experiment that has been practiced over there for 20 years, and let's not repeat it here.
Yeah, understood. Are there, yes,
There was a great article in the Times today about potential protection of IRA at a state by state basis, because when a lot of the state governments are saying, just hold the phone here, there's so much possible employment and job opportunities
Yeah.
and growth
Yes,
for our people. Do
right.
you feel that sense of, it's not pushback, it's appropriate optimism for potentially saying, let's keep this moving because there are more green jobs than dirty jobs going forward.
I am trying to be an eternal optimist right now, because I think if we get defeated before we start, right, and part of the art of this, I think, is compromise, but you have to go in big, right? And then get to a place that works for the most people. So to your point, if we lose IRA funding, so much of our agenda is thrown into disarray that I can't start from that place.
Right,
So,
it is
yeah.
about, it's about job growth.
Yes,
Right.
well, that's what, like, my big thing, and I think some of my colleagues might have been like, it's not just about jobs. I was like, yes, it is. But I think that a lot of this is about jobs, and it is about making sure that we make this actually, there's a lot of this tension. I think, to your point, the environmentalists get very focused on certain things like wind energy or this or that, and we need advocates, to move forward. But I think a lot of it is like, how do we message like the practical, real life, everyday benefits to everybody? And not just kind of like the aspirational, like green future of utopia kind of,
Well,
right?
exactly, and
Yeah.
from a state standpoint, it seems that you have the opportunity to actually play on more of the right-leaning need states, i.e. jobs,
Right,
businesses,
Yeah. That's what Yeah.
commerce.
right,
And
You're right.
the data thus far shows that that's where the growth, that's where the growth is coming from.
it's
in particular with
That's how kids
manufacturing.
go
Yeah,
in and be
that's
involved
right.
in
Yeah.
real estate.
that's right,
Manufacturing is very, as you probably know, that's where they're trying to, they've had a massive loss of jobs.
right.
In manufacturing advanced, it's called manufacturing.
That's right,
You
and
know,
the
so
red,
it's ESG
yeah.
related, of course, and it's still, God forbid, we suffer margins, but the economic side of it too.
Yeah,
Which you probably know, but that's been going on for a long time. Really, I just saw it too with Obama, the green collar economy, to your point, the hybrid, the blue, and but the training was always lacking,
And
which I
that's-
think is the crux of this.
and that's true. It's like we haven't figured out, which is why I wanted to do the Green Jobs Corps. Like,
Mhm.
how does somebody who in high school knows, well, I want to work in this field just generally, but what are my pathways?
Yeah.
Like, we haven't articulated those, but it's taking time, but it needs to be articulated. Because
Like in Germany,
There you go.
the 2-year apprenticeship. right?
There you go. Yes, apprenticeships are huge in this. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's, climate, having been in the space, it's two things. One, it will be ultimately be the greatest economic opportunity the world has ever seen. It's gonna dwarf everything else because the entire world has to focus on that. But it's also gonna put everybody on a disaster footing, on an emergency footing. It's gonna put the state on an emergency footing, and ultimately that's gonna suck up a lot of our funding.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a balancing act between the two, because we have to show people about the economic opportunity, because it's transformative. And the solutions are gonna come not necessarily from above, but from companies themselves, from startups. I mean, we will be creating an infinite number of solutions. But it's going to suck up all of our resources, because it's gonna be one unending series of emergencies and crises.
To make it happen, for sure.
It's like-
You mean the reaction, it's the urgent, taking attention away from the important?
Yeah, the flooding,
Yeah.
the sea level
Yeah, there you go.
rise, the fires.
Well, it's like Women Business Development Center, their resources were sucked up after the flood from the summer. They got, I guess, like $5 million from the government. It wasn't to help women businesses, it was basically going around Connecticut to all the flood areas and giving people home, in their homes, money for, to fix their homes, which is kind of, an interesting reactive way of doing things, but, we should probably
Yes.
wrap up and.
Sure, certainly. So, well, thank you, everyone. This has been an intriguing discussion. And, thank you again for your time and joining us. We look forward to seeing you at our third annual outlook.
And don't hesitate to reach out to, I'm not most of your state reps, I know I'm at least one, but I can connect you with someone who is, and I really appreciate everybody's thoughts tonight, it's been really helpful for me, thank you. Appreciate it.
You're quite welcome.
Thank you.